we are here tonight to address some community things that are going on, but also as a community, what we can do together. So I'm Denise Manassa. I work for CDAC Behavioral Healthcare, and I have the honor of being the moderator tonight. But also, before we get into this discussion and before I introduce the panelists or they introduce themselves, I would like to just take a few minutes of silence to recognize the individuals across the country, but in this community, that we unfortunately have lost to this disease of addiction and substance use. So if we could just take a few minutes to remember them. This one's working. All right, so also brief before we begin. On the center table, there are notepads. If there's a question that we don't get to tonight, or if there's a response that you would like to further up more questions with, it is on the table. Please feel free to fill that out, and we'll get to those. If you have a question, thank you, Leroy. Out in the audience, if you would like a question, you can always raise your hand or fill out the piece of paper, and I'll ask the question. So I really appreciate your time and your energy tonight to work together as a collaborative community. So I will start here at the end, and if you could please introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are.
Good evening. I just had to hit the switch. I'm good. Good evening, my name is Tim Smith. I'm the superintendent of the school district. Appreciative of this gathering where we discuss key issues related to addiction. We certainly want our young people to be safe and to be free of addictions and abuse of drugs and alcohol. So we're really thankful for this gathering to discuss those key topics.
Good evening. My name is Ginger Madden. I am your state attorney here in the First Judicial Circuit. Again, I am very pleased that the community is coming together to discuss these issues. I think you're going to be very surprised, not pleasantly, unfortunately, at the just unprecedented increase in the number of drug overdoses and the amount of drugs coming into our country right into I-10 throughout the Panhandle. So this is the first step to increase awareness, to continue to raise awareness. Hopefully I can share with you some of the difficulties that prosecutors have prosecuting these cases, and the efforts that we're making to convince our legislators to enact new laws, but also to amend some that are currently in place that are making it very difficult for us to go after some of these dealers in the event of a drug overdose. So again, thank you for having me. I'm so pleased to be up here with these distinguished guests, and I hope that we can answer some questions for you this evening.
Thank you, Ginger. I'm Chip Simmons. I'm the sheriff of Escambia County. I'm going to save some of the information that I have after we've done our introductions. I just want to say how much I appreciate you guys being here. I wish this auditorium was filled, but that's why we're here. We're here because we need to raise awareness, we need to educate, we need to even work on a solution. But we'll get into that more. But I appreciate y'all being here, and I certainly appreciate being here as well.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Dave Torcell. I'm the EMS chief for Escambia County. I've been here since June 1st of last year, so I'm coming up on my year anniversary. I come from a community very similar to this, very similar in demographic, very similar in population, size, public safety systems, everything, Alachua County specifically. It's curious to me just how much they mirror one another in a lot of ways. And in leaving Alachua County when I came here, they have their own set of problems just as we do. But I was amazed in the time that I've been here at the eye-opening that I've seen with the drugs and specifically the overdoses in our community. We have a major problem here. And it's very discouraging for us as EMS, especially when we see the same people over and over and over again, thinking that, hey, the last time I saw them, we gave them a medication that brought them back from potential death, took them to the hospital, only to see the same person again 6, 8, 10 weeks later and go through the same, repeated cycle. So my hope is this will get the word out, this will get enough people involved to where the right agencies, the right people, the right entities are communicating, to where maybe those missing pieces that we haven't yet had will all come together. Do I ever think we'll completely fix the problem? No. But do I think that we can make a severe impact on it? Yes. So that's why we're here. And the only thing I will say is don't be afraid to ask difficult questions, because that's why we're here. So thank you all so much.
Good evening, yes. My name is Irv Williams. I currently work with Lakeview Center and have worked in the area of substance abuse treatment and prevention for many years. I first came to Pensacola in 1976 and have seen such a change and an increase, obviously, in the problem. Fortunately, I've also been able to see some of the impact that understanding information and treatment can have in addressing the problem. There's multiple areas, multiple aspects to the problem, but there are solutions. There are things that can be done both at the individual and the family level and the community level, and I'm excited that you're here to get more information about that. And one of the biggest things I think that helps to prevent us from addressing this problem more effectively is the whole stigma related to substance use. We can talk about cancer, we can talk about heart disease, we can talk about child abuse, but when we start to talk about people who are having problems with drugs, people shy away from that. Not in my family, not in my community, not in my school, not in my church, but it's all of those places. And so I think the more that we recognize that and can address it for what it is and use the solutions that are available to us, the healthier we'll be as a community. Thank you for being here.
Also, have other representatives in the audience, and thank you very much for coming. We have the health department here, we have city police department here, so we have other representatives here. So just don't think that you're in a silo. We're all in this together, and again, I preface what they're saying. We're a community, and that's why we're starting this conversation.
Thank you, Denise. We got to start somewhere, right? So Denise and I had a conversation a couple of months ago. We talked about, that this seems to be like an event that's so huge, but not very many people know unless your family's been affected, unless you work for one of these agencies. And so we started looking at some of the statistics, and I was reading some of it was like 60% or 600%. It's just crazy numbers. And so I had to look at what we did. And it's kind of the same thing, but we had a 53% increase in our calls for service from 2020 to 2021, and then a 24% increase from 21 to 22. So you may think, what does that really mean? That means 77% increase in 2 years. Now, we had a lull there, potentially because of COVID, but in 2 years, we had a 77% increase. And this is the calls for service that we get on overdose. Now, what I think is important to understand is my numbers could be a little different than EMS numbers. We may not get all the calls that EMS gets. Our numbers can be a little bit different than what the medical examiner is going to have, because the medical examiner's office has the bodies. They have the numbers that they have. These are the calls that we get. Some of them live, some of them did not live. So this is why it's important. I was a narcotics officer in the late 80s and the early 90s. The crack cocaine really became a big issue, and almost everyone, it seemed like, was addicted to it. But they weren't dying at the rate that we're seeing today. In my position, I'm able to see some videos, and there's one video that's particularly heartbreaking, that there's a young man alone by himself in an apartment, and he's got a video on. He's got a surveillance camera on for some reason, and you can see him. He's taking the drugs, and then he just slowly bends over, and then he hits the floor. There's no one else there. It's heartbreaking, because I know that the deaths that we see that are reported, that's just one of, we had over 50 just this year alone that we went to. Again, that's not counting EMS, that's not counting anyone else. So why are we here? We're here because people have to know. And when we put information out that there was an overdose death, quite frankly, it doesn't reach the media. The media doesn't really report on that sort of thing. And we certainly don't want to glorify it. We don't want to brag about it. But how do we get the message out? So Denise was kind enough in our partnership with CDAC to say, hey, we can partner on this thing and we can get some people here and we can talk about it so that at least it's a start, right? It's not a solution, but it's a start. We can have conversations. I also understand that there are people that are hurting, potentially in this audience. There are people that have lost a loved one, and people have questions, and we may not have those answers, but we will tell you that we're investigating it, we're working on it, and this is step one. So if you wonder why we're doing this, it's because we care. It's because whenever I called Ginger Madden, she says, heck yeah, I want to be here. Heck yeah, even though her numbers will be similar to mine, even though EMS numbers may be similar to mine, that we each have a piece of this. And now the solutions are, to me, three-pronged. First is awareness, and we're starting that now. The second thing is education. We have some bright people here that can educate you as to the extent of it and what we're seeing and what causes it. And then the last thing is potentially solutions. Do we think, as was mentioned earlier, do we think we have a solution today? We may. But I foresee us having many conversations. I foresee us having, spreading out a little bit and saying, this is law enforcement side, this is the addiction side, and this is the EMS side, and this is the prosecutorial side, and this is the school side. These are all things that have to be addressed. So I'll be quiet now, but I want to make sure that you understand why law enforcement is here. And again, we have Pensacola police officers, we have members of my narcotics unit that know more about opioids and more about fentanyl. And fentanyl to me is bigger than opioids, but more about fentanyl than I know. And so they'll be here for the duration, and they'll be here afterwards if you have questions. But I think it's important to have an open conversation. And Denise, I'll kick it back to you if you have any specific questions.
I would really love to hear from the Ms. Madden, where you're seeing it from the prosecutorial side, and then hear from ENS and everybody else. But before Ms. Madden, I would like to also say that just to recognize this disease, and it is a disease, addiction is a disease, impacts every single person. It's just not the individual that's using. It impacts us all financially, our resources. And so as a community, as we come together to look at solutions, remember that this just doesn't impact us as an individual. There's a lot of community agency out there that do a lot of really good work to try and work on this. So, Ms. Madden.
All right, so before I begin talking about what we're seeing in the state attorney's office, I want to throw one more number out there for you, because I think that this will really hit it home for you when I tell you. And I got this information from the medical examiner. Sheriff was saying that all of our numbers are a little bit different because we see these cases at different stages, and some of them never get to us. He sees them in the school. I see them when they get to my office. He sees them when he gets calls and responds. You see them when you respond to medical emergencies. I mean, we all see different numbers. This number came from the medical examiner. These are individuals that got there by maybe a way of a criminal act, maybe not. She sees the dead bodies. And the numbers that she provided to me, fentanyl, for example, that's really hot right now. Fentanyl is taking a lot of lives. In 2020, she saw 65 overdose deaths as a result of fentanyl. 2021, 295. That is a 454% increase in 1 year. So she didn't give me any meth numbers, but she did give me a fentanyl with methamphetamine, 0 in 2020. She saw 213 in 2021. So if that gives you some indication of how rapidly this is progressing, those are pretty bold numbers. And again, those came from Dr. Oleski. Let's see, where do I begin? What we're seeing in the state attorney's office, as far as our felony drug cases go, we're seeing a lot of methamphetamine, a lot of heroin, and a lot of fentanyl. I would say cocaine also. I would say those are our top four, probably top four most deadly also. We have a lot of possession cases, a lot of selling buying and selling cases, a lot of trafficking cases, which involves a larger amount of money. We take a very aggressive stance against drug cases. I will tell you that, you know, every state attorney, there's 20 of them in the state of Florida, every one of us has our little pet peeve. You know, we've got our one area of criminal activity that is just, you know, that's just our thing. Well, drugs are mine. I take a very, very strong, aggressive stance against illegal substances on the street, especially those providing them to other individuals, whether it's recreational or whether they're taking advantage of an addiction that that individual has. One of the real effects on the community that the drug has, which comes into my office, is the increase in crime. Anytime you're dealing, obviously, with an illegal activity, you start right there. But look at all of the things that stems from it: the thefts, the burglaries, the violence, the homicides. I mean, all of the crime that's increased because you've got money and you've got addictions. And so, you know, that is just one of the most devastating impacts that it has on our community. What we're seeing a lot coming out of schools, at least in our juvenile justice system, we're not seeing the youth in our middle schools and high schools. I don't see a lot of them with some of these really serious drugs. Now, there are, unfortunately. But another thing that you all need to be aware of is a lot of these kids, you know, you throw marijuana, alcohol in the mix, of course, nicotine, but you've also got Xanax, Adderall, you've got the prescription medications that, you know where these kids are getting them? They're getting them out of their parents' medicine cabinet. And they're taking them to school, selling them, or their parents are taking them to a doctor, they're getting prescriptions. I mean, rightfully so. I mean, that's a necessity sometimes. But the kids will go and sell them. So we see a lot of that in the schools. It's not just the big boogeyman, you know, scary drugs. These are drugs that they're getting out of their homes and taking to school. We see a lot of that with the younger folks. So we do have a lot of just felony possession, trafficking. A lot of these drugs, I think I said earlier, they're coming right into Escambia County and I-10. They're coming across the border, they're across our southern borders. You know, there was a day when, you remember Breaking Bad, that very popular show. I don't know what it was on TV. But Sheriff pretty much ran all those meth cookers out of the county. We don't deal with that a lot anymore. That's all done down in Mexico and brought over the border, transported over the border. And as they begin to come east and come into the state of Florida, you know where they come into? They come into Escambia County. And they continue travel right through Santa Rosa County, Okaloosa County, Walton County. That's all a part of our First Circuit. That's all a part of my jurisdiction. So I see it across the county. And I know I had noticed some of the numbers in here where it was alarming that Escambia's numbers were some of the highest in the state of Florida. I did not realize that. But I do believe that that's a part of it because this is the entry port, Escambia County. Last thing I'll say, again, in my office, with all of these drug overdoses, you've got to ask yourself, well, what about the individuals that are providing these illegal substances to these individuals who are dying? Many are dying because they ingested something they didn't even know that they were ingesting. So many of the drugs nowadays are laced with fentanyl. I don't know what the amount is, but it's like a teeny amount of fentanyl that is deadly. And one of the scary things is the way that they distribute it, or I guess the way that they package it, or they press it and make little pills that just look like little pills. Looks harmless. It's deadly. And what do we do about this? Well, the way that the law is written right now, it's very complex and very difficult to prosecute the drug dealers. And what we're trying to do, and there's a real legal explanation for it, because the state is required to prove that there's a proximate cause, the defendant's act directly caused the death, and that gets very difficult because many of these individuals who die of drug overdoses have multiple substances in their system or traces of substance, and we've got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant's act of distributing this substance is the direct cause of the decedent's death. It becomes very complicated. And so what we're trying to do in Tallahassee is we're trying to change the language from proximate cause to a significant contributing factor, which would lessen that burden for us a little bit in a court of law. We did get it before the legislature. I think the Sheriff's Association did this actually. I'm not sure about that, but we did get it before the legislature this year. It did not get passed, but it will be presented again next year, and we will continue to go and to fight until we get, the laws written in a way that we can again begin to aggressively prosecute. They can't ignore these kinds of numbers, and there's nothing to suggest that they're going down. So, we're really hoping for some success. We have, I can only think of two off the top of my head, and then I'm going to stop talking. We have successfully prosecuted a couple of these cases. There are currently 2 individuals who are serving life sentences for providing illegal substances to an individual who passed away. 2 separate cases. One of those was a confession. It was easy. The other, the evidence was just very strong. And so we have had some successful prosecutions, but it sometimes takes that perfect set of facts to fall together. We've got several cases pending now in Okaloosa County. We'll see how successful we are with those, but we're doing our best. And I looked online, and it looks like the state attorneys throughout the state are really beginning to address this aggressively, and hopefully we'll have some more success.
Thank you. I think that as a community, I know you have a question, and I will get to that, but for those of the individuals in the audience that may not understand what an opioid is or what methamphetamine is, Dr. Williams, would you mind addressing a little bit of that so us as a community can understand that there is a difference, and if you could help us understand that a little bit.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, sorry, Dr. Williams. I asked Dr. Williams. I'm sorry. I asked Dr. Williams
You've had enough time on the mic.
I asked Dr. Williams to explain a little bit what the difference between like an opioid and methamphetamine means.
Yeah, I think oftentimes the two are confused. There's a whole, I'm not saying litany, a number of different drugs, and the state attorney mentioned several of them that can be problematic. Though I think the ones that we're seeing, particularly recently, the major problems with are opioid-related drugs, and by that, I won't go into all of the technical words, but basically there are drugs that are derived from opium, and there are different synthetic drugs that come down that family. And many of you would be very familiar with some of the basic pain medications that you get if you go to the doctor, if you go to the hospital when you have a surgery. If you get Oxycontin, Tylenol, that's not one. There's several different, Dilaudid, there are several different ones. But the ones that we're seeing a lot of problems with in terms of overdose deaths relate to a synthetic opiate that people refer to as fentanyl. And people compare fentanyl in terms of its strength to heroin. A lot of people think about heroin, that's the drug that's been killing people for years. You shoot it up your arm, you die, it's very potent. Well, fentanyl can be anywhere from 50 to 100 times more potent than heroin. And if you think about that and you look at how it is used to cut other drugs, even when people are not looking for that opiate and it's being stamped or fake drugs made with it, people don't know the power or the intensity. We even have, and I think even in this community, we've had situations where law enforcement and EMF have had to protect themselves against arrests related to opiate and fentanyl in particular, because just absorption in the skin can kill you. So it's that level of potency that as a nation, as a community, we're seeing that we didn't see before with a lot of the other drugs that we're dealing with. Methamphetamines is more of a stimulant. It's not an opiate. It can be manufactured in your home, and it has different kinds of effects on the body and on the brain. But a lot of what we're seeing, again, locally, and where we're having so many issues with the overdose deaths related to, are the various kinds of opiates, and particularly fentanyl being one of those in that category.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And it all really stems from the brain. And I know EMS was going to talk a little bit about Narcan and what they're seeing out on the street, and then I will get to your question.
So one of the things surprising to me is, of course, over the years we've seen Narcan as the drug we give that counteracts these overdoses we're seeing. And I'm going to call out someone in the audience that's here today because he's helped us with a lot of information that we need to kind of bring us up to speed on some things and what they're seeing in the hospitals. Dr. Mark Stavros, he's sitting in the second row there. Sorry, I had to call you out. We actually met with him yesterday. He's a board-certified emergency physician. He's board-certified addiction medicine. He's the director of a local ER with our hospital, so a wealth of knowledge and been very instrumental in assisting us with kind of gaining some knowledge in some different areas and what's going on. And one of the things that's very surprising is last year, you can see it, I have it on a television over there if you stop by our table, but you can see it on our EMS dashboard, is we put the number of overdoses that we run on there. And I've seen some lashback on that of, well, it's just a number. You're right, it is, it's just a number. But those numbers represent a lot of different things. They represent a lot of resources, they represent a lot of money, they represent death, they represent a lot of things in our system that we can't fix or haven't found a way yet to fix. So it's not just a number. And that number is going up significantly. We're looking at double the number of overdoses this year in 2022 that we saw last year. 1,391 doses of Narcan we gave last year. And in our recent District 1 meeting, I had someone from the hospital ask us, what are the basic three drugs that you're the top three that you're seeing in the community? And before I could respond, with great wit and correctly, Dr. Stavros mentioned fentanyl, and fentanyl. And that is absolutely correct. Where it used to be common for us to give somebody 1 or 2 doses of Narcan in the field, we're giving as many as 4 and 5 doses of Narcan in the field now. Because before, that would have been just something that's ludicrous. After you've given 2 doses, well, it's not going to work. That's not the problem. But that is the problem we're seeing now. 3 and 4 doses in, we're finally getting a response from a patient, which is mind-blowing to paramedics to see that and say, I've given this person 4 doses of Narcan, and they're just now coming out of this. What in the world is in this drug? The impact that has on our community is quite significant because these folks that are using drugs have no idea what is in their drugs. And as Dr. Williams mentioned, the power of that, that we can only do so much with our EMS services and the medications we have to counteract that, physician staff at the hospital with their treatments. It's the unknown. You know, what's going to happen? The number of overdoses we're running is just staggering. The numbers that we're seeing on a daily basis, you know, as of a few weeks ago, we were averaging 5.2 overdoses per day in this community. We're up to 7.6 overdoses per day now, and that's just been in a matter of about 4 weeks. And that number continues to go up and up and up. So again, it's perhaps for a different discussion that we are going to have down the road, and I'd love to see a big turnout for it. And I'll perhaps mention this later when we get to it, but there are some things we've now had available to us in this community that I think we found the missing pieces, and I'm going to share that with you a little bit later when we get kind of down with some other discussion. So thank you.
And I understand a community member had a question. Would somebody from Community Health, would you mind see if she's okay? She stepped out front, and would you mind just checking on her and making sure she was okay? Thank you. Because we want to make sure everybody here is safe, and if you've lost somebody, we understand what you may be going through in this conversation. Does anybody from the audience have a question that I might be able to direct it for you or ask for you? So hopefully I can read this. So one of the things she asked was pain medication being given extremely loosely without monitoring the patient. Would anybody like to address that? I believe physicians, from what I understand, have to monitor how much they are giving. Is that correct? And maybe Dr. Oh. Is that your question? say that again for me?
They're not doing a good enough job of monitoring. When they give Lortab to a teenager and that teenager becomes addicted after 3 days, and so they cut him loose, they don't send him to Lakeview. I took him to Lakeview, and what did he get? He turned out they got him on methadone forever until he died.
I'm so sorry for your loss, and I think the legislature has put something in place for that. We have a monitoring system, correct?
Yes, there is a physician monitoring system in terms of prescriptions. Unfortunately, it doesn't address the example that you gave. It monitors the numbers of prescriptions that a doctor writes repeatedly, or whether or not it's out of line with what would be good medical practice, but not in terms of an individual's, what's appropriate for an individual. You know, Florida got the reputation of being, having pill mills where doctors were just writing prescriptions, 100 times more than what was really involved. And so the monitoring system has helped to curtail that to a large extent. But that individual issue of what kind of medications are prescribed and what's appropriate is a different issue. I'm sorry to hear the experience that your individual had with their experience with methadone treatment, which I'll talk about a lot later, because that is one of the medications that can be used effectively to help someone who's developed an addiction to opiates. But also there's been issues of people who've lost even after attempting that type of treatment. But basically, the answer to your question is, I think the type of monitoring that is done in terms of prescribing really doesn't address that individual circumstance of whether or not the prescription is appropriate for that individual person.
Is when they give the prescription to the person, and okay, they give maybe 5 days. Okay, and I see that the doctor thinks that's the appropriate thing, but when the person calls to get another medication, they can't get it anymore. He doesn't refer them to Lakeview. He doesn't refer them to an addiction counselor or anything. They do nothing, and I feel like it's their responsibility when somebody calls in to get a prescription and they figure out that he's addicted, that they do something too. If they don't do anything, the person's floating out there taking drugs and no telling where they're getting them, and until you see it and then realize what's happening and then you do something about it. But in the meantime, what happens to the person? Are they going to die because they get a hold of fentanyl or Lortabs and take too many? I mean, that's what I'm saying. Pain management doctors mostly do a good job, but also, and I will address this when you go to the emergency room, they do a pretty good job about not giving you pain medicine when you're, it's up like right then. When you're on pain management, they do a pretty good job of that. But other doctors, when you are on pain management and you say surgery or something, they offer you other, like oxycodone or Oxycontin. And most people, now, I know someone who had the surgery and they went through it, but they talked to their pain management doctor and didn't take it until they discussed it with their pain management doctor. Everybody doesn't do that. Yes. And I feel like that's a big problem too.
Yeah, I agree with you that there's a responsibility that exists in terms of really managing it. And oftentimes physicians are in a position, particularly with recent changes, where they have guidelines in terms of renewing prescriptions and people who are abusing it, but the ideal, again, would be for them to refer a person on to get help when they recognize that they are abusing their prescriptions.
And I know we have more community members that have a question, but you did mention methadone, and that I'm not a methadone specialist, but I know that is a prescribed treatment, and that is been ongoing, that we help individuals that have an opiate dependency. Do you want to address that, or?
I can address it now if you want, or
Yeah,
you can go. Okay.
yeah, if you could explain methadone or
Sure.
Suboxone or Subutex.
Yeah. Again, with the various opiate drugs, in terms of how they affect the brain and the individual's functioning, when people become physically dependent on this class of drugs, you take them away all of a sudden, and they go through withdrawal. That withdrawal is very painful. It's very demanding in terms of, I need to do something about this. It also creates a craving for the drug. There are 3 medications that have been, that are used currently that help with those 2 basic issues of withdrawal and craving. Methadone has been around the longest. It was started back in the 1960s and used for people who at that time were addicted to heroin. And the field has learned some things. When I started with Lakeview in '76, the methadone treatment was you give a person methadone for 21 days, help them come off of the heroin that they were using, and send them on their way. Well, what we found is very quickly people were going right back to the heroin, because what had happened in their brain as far as the use of opiates was concerned, that 21 days didn't fix it, didn't start it. And so then the medical profession recognized that by maintaining a person on methadone, just like you might maintain a person who has diabetes on a certain drug, they're able to function. They're not getting high, they're able to function. It deals with that withdrawal, it deals with that craving. They're not craving other drugs. So methadone has been used as a maintenance for over 50 years now. I worked with methadone programs, like I say, since the '76. I've seen the good and the bad of it. It is not a silver bullet. It doesn't fix everybody's situation. But I've seen people who've turned their life around and able to function, and sometimes being on methadone for a long period of time. In recent years, other drugs have come into play. Suboxone or buprenorphine is another name that many physicians can prescribe from their offices and connect people with counseling. It does the same thing. It helps with the brain issue of what opiates do. Vivitrol is another drug that can even be taken in an injection form. So that whole field of what we call medicated assisted therapy is there to help people who have addictions to opiates. It is not a cure-all, but again, for many people, it's a lifesaver because they're no longer chasing the drugs, they're no longer on the street getting that illicit substance that they don't know how much fentanyl is in it, and they're not overdosing. So that's the 3 primary drugs right now that are being used to help people address their physical dependence on opiate-like drugs.
Thank you. Leroy, did you have a community member that may have a question?
Hi, my name's Jean Stout, and I've been listening to all of you, and I just lost my son a little over 20 weeks ago. It's been over, 12 years, dear, through his addiction. I've heard a lot from you guys. I've done my research as well. And I have several questions only because I don't think you're telling everyone the sad fact of it, like the nitty-gritty part of it, only because I understand you talk about, the benefits of Suboxone and the other helpful medication, MATs. But addicts don't have money. They don't have insurance. There's a long waiting list. Trust me, my son been through it all, okay? He died at 32 years old. You don't know how difficult it was to get him help. Even the Vivitrol shot. They want, what, $1,000, $1,200, $1,500? Who has that kind of money? Parents? They have mortgaged their houses. So I appreciate you for saying that. But it comes down to where they get the money. Who's going to help them? And in that timely frame, because relapse, they're going to relapse. So I appreciate you for saying that, but it's actually, the money part, okay? EMS, sir, I understand what you're saying. What I want to know is, I know you have, because my son, again, he's told me, he shared things with me. Naloxone saved him many times. However, I want to know from you, sir, do you have trainings for your staff on the callousness, the lack of empathy that may be there? Because, like you said, there's repeated individuals. Do you have trainings that help your staff to overcome that? Because I know as a social worker, I could be callous too. I mean, after years of seeing the same families and everything else. So I wonder what you do, to help your staff. Because I know the same individuals keep on going, and they know you're there too. And that increases their drug usage. Sir, Sheriff, thank you so much for being here. I understand what you're trying to do. However, speaking to an investigator the other day, he tells me there's 60 deaths since January 2022. However, I notice in the news, you get traffic stops, you seize trunkfuls of drugs and money and everything else. And I'm thinking to myself, and I know I can't be alone, sir. If you can get all that off the street, why are there still 60 overdose deaths since January 2022? I don't understand that. And the investigator said, I asked him, I'm like, why aren't you guys investigating my son's case? I have the information. It's on his cell phone. You know what he tells me? He says, assuming workforce, there's not enough. So how are you going to help this community by increasing your work staff to get those dealers off the street? And it's those low-level dealers. It's not the big fish. And oh, let me tell you what, an investigator told me that too. Oh, we only get the big fish. Well, how has that been working for you? All these numbers, these high numbers, they should be lowering because you're getting the big fish. Well, it's not working out, so I say get the little fish. Miss Madden, I appreciate you too, and your numbers. I also reached out to the medical examiner. I want to ask you, when you gave that number of 295, was that in the 4-county area? Or was that just Escambia County? Because the medical examiner quoted me 220. Just in Escambia County alone, my son was 219, December 11th, 2021. So I don't know where that number, or if it's just for the 4 counties, I don't know. And I also would like to know is what criteria would you actually need to prosecute these lower fish, lower level dealers, suppliers that come in, oh, there's fentanyl, they're making a buck, they're making a high buck, because they want the addicts taking this stuff. What criteria is needed? I hear you say, oh, we're going to take it to, Tallahassee. But you know what? There's going to be hundreds, thousands of more deaths by then. I'm going to write a letter to the governor. That's what I do. And I'm sure I know, Sheriff Simmons, you've seen my letter from Representative Michelle Zalzman's office. Sir, with the school superintendent, my son he got in trouble a long, long time ago in school, so I don't want to leave you out. But I appreciate you being here as well. So those are the questions, and then on top of everything else, and this will be it. I'm sorry for long-winded, but this is important, guys, because this is the nitty-gritty part of it. You talk about statistics. I don't like that word, because my son wasn't a statistic. And you may be concerned with all those statistics, but in my mind, I'm a statistic. And there are thousands, millions more of us still breathing, still walking this earth that votes all of you in, helps get you in your elected professions. We have a say. And I belong to lots of groups. And we're getting fed up. And you gotta be concerned with those numbers too, because there's more of us still breathing.
I think, thank
that's
you
it,
so
thank
much.
you.
No, I think one of the things that I take away, and I will let all of these professionals answer the question, and maybe on the street, I don't know, narcotics officers are here, can an individual tell the difference of what a drug dealer's selling? And this is just opinion, they would be able to answer. Sometimes the drug dealers don't even know what they're selling because they're...
Strips are illegal. They're illegal now. As of last month, they're illegal. They got taken out of the language out of legislation.
Well, I am not a legislator, so I don't know that question. But would anybody like to address that? Because I think that's part of the reasons why we're here, Jane, is yes, you are a person. Your son is a person. We're all here, compassionate individuals, to try and work on these things. And I think every single person up there on the panel understands and is empathetic and sympathetic. So EMS, I've met, and Chip, please address some of the questions.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say how sorry I am for your son. I think that you've spoken to a number of our investigators. You understand, or you should know by now, that we have not closed the book on your investigation. We're still working the investigation. We also understand that we're not going to go fast enough for you, and there's nothing that we can do that will probably explain everything away. Your comment that we don't go after the small fish, we only go after the big fish, that's not true. We have partnered with our federal authorities. The second I took office, we've partnered with our federal authorities so we can get some of these big fish. And here's the nitty-gritty that I would say to you, that we have no idea how many lives we've saved by one traffic stop and getting this fentanyl off the street. Recently, we have made many big arrests, but we can have it all. We can do more than one thing. If we seize 50 grams of fentanyl, how many, I'd have to ask my narcotics, it could be 100 lives we've saved. I can't turn my back on 100 lives. I can't do that. So we have got to continue with our work with stopping these cars, stopping this fentanyl coming into our neighborhoods. We have got to work with DEA to find out where it's come from. It's come from Mexico, but we have to stop it from getting here. We have got to stop the bleeding, or we're not going to get anywhere. Then there's going to be thousands of people. We'll be sitting here 2 years from now, and we'll have 1,000 deaths. And then we'll wonder how that happened. Well, that happened because your law enforcement agencies stopped dealing and stopped getting with the people that are bringing the large amounts in. So we're going to continue to bring large amounts in, and I'll give all the credit in the world to the Pensacola Police Department, the Escambia County Sheriff's investigators, who every single traffic stop, every arrest they make are saving dozens, if not hundreds of lives on a weekly basis. So that I don't want to lose sight of. The second part is if we have a low-level dealer, if you will, we don't turn our back on those guys. We see more than most people would see in a lifetime. We see that in one day. We have to go and respond to these things. We care about the people that are dying from this overdose. We had a deputy last week had to get Narcan himself because they're out there risking their own lives. And they're not dealing drugs, they're not using drugs, they're not doing anything. All they did that day was kiss their family goodbye, go to work, and then a couple hours later they find themselves in need for Narcan so they can go home to their family. I want to make sure that we understand that there are people, whether it's EMS crews, whether it's state attorneys, whether it's the doctors, the school district, we're doing everything that we possibly can. We're here because we understand the nitty-gritty. We're here because we care about each person. You talk about statistics. This is new statistics for me. I don't go by statistics. What I go by is quality, the quality of the investigation. These people that are bringing fentanyl in, we give them the highest bond we possibly can, and we're there and we see see if they can get a high sentence as we possibly can. So we are not forgetting your case, but we have a lot of other things that we're doing at the same time. We're taking the small fish off the street. We're certainly looking at the big fish, and in the process of doing it, we're saving hundreds, if not thousands of lives.
Anyone else would like to address that? And I know our superintendent is here, and we haven't directed any questions to you, but we do appreciate your time here. David, would you like to address EMS? She wants to do a follow-up.
Well, I just
yes.
I want to
sorry.
follow up one thing that Sheriff Simmons says. when we talk about low-level dealers, you know, talking about the person maybe on the corner who's just doing the hand delivery, a lot of times those low-level people are addicts themselves. I mean, they sell to use. And the really scary thing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, all these low-level folks that we pull off the street, we can't get them in the backseat of a patrol car before there's someone else filling that spot. This is a societal problem. We've got to attack this. We don't have enough jails and prisons to pull these individuals who are buying a serving, whatever you say, breaking it in half, taking half, and selling the other. We don't have enough jails and prisons to hold all of those folks. And that's why it is so important that we partner up with other agencies to try to get the large amounts of drugs being brought in.
Ma'am, first and foremost, my sincerest condolences for your son. I have 4 brothers, one of which I lost in 2020 to addiction. You talked about the nitty-gritty. You're not going to find, and feel free to ask around, you're not going to find anybody that's about as vocal as I am about this. I've been here 11 months. I've stirred up a lot of stuff. I've had conversations that people don't like to have. I stood up in a room full of my peers, all of which who are much more longer serving in this community, who are much bigger pillars in this community than me. I'm a small fish, I'm an EMS chief, and I said, can we please get to the point and start talking about the real problem, all the dead people in this community. You can pull up to a Circle K and find someone lying there dead, and that has become the norm in this community. How? We hear people calling in saying, I think there's a dead person in my yard, and lo and behold, it's an overdose death in their yard. How is that the norm? So I will tell you, as far as EMS goes, because I want to answer your question, you had asked about the empathy of these people that we see over and over and over again. You're right. When you do something in a field for so long and you see the same thing over and over, you had mentioned, I think your word was a little bit of callousness you can get. A couple of things that we've done is, number one, yes, we absolutely do training in-house on how to deal with a variety of things. Mental health disorder, because those go hand in hand with substance abuse. Substance abuse disorder. We see a lot of folks, because I have an autistic son who's nonverbal. We see a lot of autism and those types of things, mental developmental disability. So we have a variety of training that we put our people through to allow them to have an understanding of what is the patient seeing from their view, not your view of them. With that, we also have things that we put on all of our vehicles so that when they're out and servicing the public and they're on calls, we find someone that perhaps has issues with food, someone who has issues with healthcare, someone who has issues with all of these types of things that can be available to them in our community, and we give them that. It has all the phone numbers and everything on it where we try to direct them, because one of my biggest frustrations for EMS is, and I've mentioned this, and I mentioned this when we opened it tonight, is we pick up the patient, we take it, you know, hopefully we don't have to give them Narcan, but we do. We give them Narcan, we bring them out of this state, potentially save their life, which pretty much is what it does, take them to the hospital, and then go, okay, what's going to happen now? Will we see them again? Will we not see them again? Will the medical examiner see them? And that is extremely frustrating to me to say, how has this become acceptable here? And with all the intelligence we have in this community, how have we not said, okay, let's do something about this. No, let's stop talking about this. Let's actually do something about this. I've been here 11 months. June 1st will be my anniversary, so almost, 11 months now complete. So, and in that 11 months, we've evidently gained enough traction. We were probably going to talk about this later, but I'll just mention it right now. The state of Florida called me directly today in my office and said, we're seeking you out because we have identified your agency and your county as an entity that needs great assistance with let's just talk about it. They just talked about drugs. It's with a drug problem. Of course, they're going to use big fancy terms, but they would like us to get an MIH or community paramedicine program here, because the missing piece that we have no control over of EMS is once they go to the hospital, the only time we're going to see them again is when they're out on the street. And perhaps in very unfortunate circumstances. But what about if we can involve our paramedics in a program where after someone is discharged from the hospital, we're continually going back and make sure they're taking the Suboxone. We can get them the Suboxone. I've had this conversation with Dr. Stavros, and tonight, after this meeting, I'm going to have this conversation with Dr. Williams. What about if we continue to do checkups on them? Are you going to your appointments? How's your health been? Are you taking the other medicines that are prescribed for you? That is the missing component that if I can't do what law enforcement does, which I can't, And if I can't do what the physicians do, which I can't, what can I do as an EMS provider that I'm not already doing? What can I step outside of my box to go, okay, we've done our job and we've done it well. What else can we do? And that's the next step we're willing to take. And I'm very vocal about it. I mean, all these meetings that we participate in, we have a large group of people here that have recognized, folks, we have a problem. And we're going to do something about it. Now let's just get all the right people involved to get us there. So please don't think that what you've said to us tonight has, at least as far as I'm concerned, and I know for these people up here are concerned as well, that this has fallen on deaf ears, because it has not. I promise you that. I'll even give you my phone number. You can call me if you have questions, if you have concerns. Like I said earlier tonight, I expect, no problem. I would be happy to take you onto our group and get information from you and get your input and what did you go through? What barriers did you have, so we as the professionals that are trying to fix this problem can identify, okay, here's one of the problems they had, how do we fix that? So you have my word that is what we are working towards. I know sometimes the wheel doesn't spin fast enough for you, and I'm very sorry for that. I kind of felt the same way with my experiences before. But just know that you are heard, and we're not just hearing you, but we're actually listening to you, and we understand what's going on. And you have advocates here. You really do. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody in the
Denise,
community?
before-
Yes.
I just
Go
want to
ahead,
follow
Dr.
up.
Williams.
Again, you made a very good point in terms of treatment resources, and just one example being in terms of Vivitrol being very expensive. Well, the state has recognized that, and there are some state funds in the community to provide Vivitrol to individuals who qualify at no cost to them. There are other kinds of things that we're tapping into to try to address this. Yes, there's a waiting list for residential treatment in this community. So there are those shortages of resources, but there are things that are being done to try to address that. Lakeview now has 3 applications into the federal government for different kinds of grant programs that will bring resources to the community that we don't currently have funded by the county or the state. And so again, as others have said, we'll empathize with your loss and the experience that you've gone through. I think that's the other thing that it's helpful for people to recognize the breadth of that experience and that consequence of losing someone, whether it's losing them to death or whether it's losing them in the grips of that addiction in terms of how it impacts their lives. And we certainly don't take that lightly or say that there's a quick fix to that. And there are other kinds of support programs that are very important for people to recognize that they can tap into as they're going through that journey with their loved one. Just want to let you know that there are some things that are being done to try to address that access issue, that funding issue, as it relates to treatment.
Thank you. I think we have another question from a community member.
Yes, before I leave, I want to address the question to Dr. Smith. One of the deleterious effects of opioid addiction or addiction in general is the acquisition and transmission of chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, and HIV. And I know, Dr. Williams, you're familiar with the Phase and Shape program. I just want to know, Dr. Smith, what is the school doing to educate our students about opioid addiction and how to prevent it?
Well, education certainly is an important piece on this matter. And we have in our schools, we have health components that are taught. We also have some support mechanisms in place through our Navigator program, which is more like a social worker employed to support our schools. That's been something that we've added this year, also increasing our guidance staffs. A big piece of this being immersed in the education, the standards that are related to health, is also the prevention that can take place. So we really like to have that community feel in our schools where if students are struggling with addiction, with usage, that they are able to find support and to find assistance. I also wanted to add that most of our situations that we have in our schools as far as drug use goes is really in the traditional marijuana usage. Also, we have had an increase in liquid vape pens with THC. So that's been another increase that we have seen. And it does circle back to how are we going about educating that student and providing resource and support when students do get involved in some of these difficult situations. There are some other drugs that we've seen used in the schools, Xanax, Adderall. We have not seen a heavy influx of fentanyl or meth or cocaine. Our problem is the increased referrals that we've seen for that marijuana use and some of those other drugs in that Adderall, those prescription medications. So it is a collaborative effort that we have to engage in. Folks at this table support us greatly in addressing our needs and working together with us, and we're very appreciative of that.
I do have to say that the agency that I work for, CDAC Behavioral Healthcare, we also work with the school district in providing prevention messages and services. For example, going into the school and presenting to young people about how to have a conversation about how to turn down a substance or the dangers around vaping or marijuana use. I've had the personal opportunity to go and present on that. I think, again, like Dr. Smith said, it's a collaborative effort. Law enforcement is there, SROs are there to answer questions of these young people. It's just not the sheriff's department, it's the police department. We have great people putting in efforts to help this community. And I think, I don't want to speak for everybody in the room, but I have the privilege of knowing some of the people in this room, law enforcement and the medical people. We put our heart and souls into every one of you. It may not seem like it, and the wheels do sometimes turn very slowly, but we are really trying our very best collaboratively to make a difference in this community, because we live here too. We're invested. It's just not you. We're invested. We have families that are in the schools. We have families that decide to be EMS people. We have family members that are going to school here. It's our community too, and we invest in it. Like I said, the wheels may turn a little bit slow, but we're invested too.
Denise, can I add a point too? I'm glad you mentioned our school resource officers, and they've been a tremendous help to us, and those relationships that are formed with some of the students on the campus and the staff are really valuable and very important. We also have a health coordinator in our district who works closely with our health department, and we're very thankful for the health department and that support that exists there, because it does take a collaborative effort, a team effort. And I just want to also thank Representative Salzman, who's here heading up a task force on mental health, and that's a big piece for our community as well. So I was glad to see your work going into that important arena for it.
Chip, do you have anything to add right now?
Again, I think that we all have a specific task, but we also branch out. We figured out that we can no longer just keep doing this. We can't keep doing that. EMS, years ago were just transport, and now they do so much more than that. I mean, we work very well together. I can tell you from a law enforcement perspective, we're so glad when EMS shows up, because to us that's the hospital, and we just back off and let them do their thing. So I know they do more training, they have more capability. In the schools, again, it makes our life a lot easier. The state attorney's office, we have a great relationship. I think that what you're seeing here is a lot of crossover with our function. And I think what you're seeing also is a lot more compassion. You talked a little bit about callousness, and I think it's impossible to go through, do something day after day after week after week after week and not get a little bit jaded by some of that stuff. But we do have training. We do have a mental health aspect of our agency, so that you can talk to somebody, so we can prevent that. I think that we're here for a good reason, and that reason is so that we can start that conversation. It sounds like we've individually started those conversations. EMS is way on down the road. The doctor knows a lot more than I know about recovery. And I don't know anything about schools except for, I graduated from one. But I can tell you that we do have the relationships, and I think that if we take where we are and where we think we can go, whether it's money that might be available from the opioid settlements or something else, we need to make sure that we do it wisely. I made a big deal about, we're not going to stop arresting people for large amounts of fentanyl or large amounts of methamphetamine, because I think we can do it all. We have got to do it all. We can't ignore one piece, because that one piece will fester, and that's what we're seeing now. And that's why we have the opioid addiction. You talked about the nitty-gritty. If you see what I see, and if you see what the EMS crews and what the teachers see every day, and the victims of families that have passed away, you'll know what nitty-gritty means, and that's why we're here in the first place.
Thank you. Do we have any questions other from the audience?
Surprise. Thank you. Dr. Smith, right? Okay. I just thought of something. Okay, whatever happened to several weeks ago, there was an overdose at Tate High School. And what became of that? I was trying to research it, and I didn't hear anything more, but there was an overdose there, and I just wonder how that individual may be doing. And if you would know, I don't know.
Well, with a student situation of that nature, of course, I cannot speak to that matter because of the privacy of student rights. So when that happens, our people go into action to provide support. We want to make sure we get medical attention as quickly as we can in a situation like that. Make sure our guidance counselors are working with the student and the family, because certainly when you get a situation like that, it's a huge red flag, and we need to circle up and certainly keep eyes on our student when they are recovered and come back, whenever that may be. If they're typically maybe at another school site, so we need to get that information there and make sure that the resource is put into place. So that's going to be our response, is to circle up and provide resource and support.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Smith. And I think there's a few more, and I'm going to preface that individuals still have rights. Families have rights. Adolescents have rights, and part of that right is their ability to maintain some privacy. And adolescents, we may not hear about an adolescent because they are an adolescent, they're not 18, so the family has a right to that privacy. I was saw the medical examiner speak today, and unfortunately, not in this county, she had to report on a 13-year-old, and she believes that they received their substance through a vape. And so it's across generations, it's across ethnicity, it's across financial, no matter where your family is at, financially, upper tier level, or are just making day-to-day money to survive. It is impacting us all. So that Tate family, I'm sure they're working on it.
Also, if I can just add a piece on the vaping. The vaping is a very challenging situation for us because it can be done in a very stealthy manner, and it's hard to track. The residue it goes away quickly. It is very easy for a student to engage with a vape pen and it can be very, very hard to track that down and to sometimes even see it, because that can be done so quickly. The problem with that is what's in those vape pens. There's a concern for intense tobacco and nicotine, I should say nicotine, not tobacco, the nicotine product. But that's just the beginning, because then you have THC products. And that is very concerning, and that's where we've seen increases in that use. So our school administrators keep an eye out for that. They're very diligent when they get information, when they see something. But that's the hard piece, is seeing it and finding out about that. So, and of course that can happen easily after school, before school, anywhere. Those vape pens are a very dangerous device for our students when they have THC and intense nicotine in them.
Thank you. Did you have another question?
I do. I'll start with Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith, do y'all have the PTA programs that you used to in all the schools?
We have PT. Are you talking about a specific program?
Yeah, parent-teacher associations. Remember them?
Yes, we have those. Yes.
Okay. Do you involve your parent-teacher associations in helping you combat the drugs and the vaping and smoking? Do you do that? Do you work with them and teach them so they can go to so they can empower themselves against the drug dealers?
So I don't know the answer to that question.
Tim, I can help you. I'm on the county PTA board still, so I can kind of help you a little bit. Tim's a little new. The county PTA actually has a health vice president at the county level, and they actually work for the health department, and they provide free training to all the PTA presidents and the school teachers and principals that attend the annual training on tobacco use, vape use, as well as how to prevent alcohol and drug addiction. They also reach out in a quarterly manner to all of these moms through apps that we now use as members of PTA. It's all mostly digital now, hardly anything goes home on paper. And it invites them to obtain the free training for their PTA moms as well as for their students, or to come into the schools and provide that training for free. Each PTA is chartered through that specific school. We have about 26 PTAs in the county, but how many schools? 56 schools? How many schools do we have total, Tim?
We have 32 elementaries. We have 7 high schools and 9 middle schools.
So we don't have one in every school, but we also have PTA partner schools. So the answer to your question is absolutely, very engaged. And Tim has a representative that sits on the PTA board at the county level with us, and we have a huge partnership as well as a seat at the table at the Public School Foundation, which is a partner in the school district. So absolutely.
Let me ask you one question.
Sure.
Do you go to them personally, or have a representative go to them personally to gather everybody and make them aware of it?
We do all of these things in person.
Okay, that's a good thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's great. But one thing
No, thank you. Thank you.
I just got kind of sidetracked on Dr. Smith after that. But what I wanted to ask the rest of y'all is, why are you not using your county residents' stuff for help? You know, if you went and if you put it out there, the parents that's lost kids to drugs would help you. And not only that, you have people that you can gather to help every one of you. And Chip Simmons, you could use so much help for that, and so could you, EMS. I mean, I know you do a good job. I know someone that works in your department, works with you, so I've heard a lot about you. But Chip Simmons, there's some things that really, you know, if you went to the public, if you went to them and said, hey, I need volunteers, you can have people who's got degrees in this, that is not working, that would gladly volunteer with you and help the EMS too. And Ms. Madden, they certainly would help y'all too. And Lakeview Center, I do have one thing to say to you about it. My son fell asleep at the wheel of the car and he died. But let me tell you something about that. He was on the Methadone program. He'd been on it, I think, 3 weeks. when his blood report came, the stuff that the methadone that they gave him that he did not get anywhere else, the methadone they gave him, because I took him, he had 3 times the amount. If he had been someone that had taken all that methadone in that day, he wouldn't have been able to walk. He would have been dead. So, I mean, I don't understand how that could be. How 3 weeks it could accumulate so much. Can you answer me that?
I obviously can't speak to that specific, but one of the ways in which methadone is dispensed and utilized, particularly in the first 3 months of being on the program, they get a dose at the window only. They don't have to take home medications. And the amount that they get is determined by the physician when they first come into the program. They start at a relatively low dose, and they gradually go up. And that gradual, that increase is typically after 2 or 3 weeks. So I obviously I can't speak to, and I'm not disputing what happened to your son. What I'm saying is the typical process is that they get the medication at the window, it's observed by the nurse, and it's prescribed by the doctor for that individual based on their use, their size, et cetera.
I know they did because I was there. But the one thing about it, does it stay in the system so much and accumulate so much that it would be 3 times what it would kill a person if they took it the same day? Is that a normal thing, or is that the way it works, or is that?
Basically, the effective dose of methadone lasts about 36 hours, okay? And so a person is getting a second dose or a second day within that window, and so they're not getting overdosed or over-medicated based on the amount that they're given. So there should not have been 3 times the appropriate limit in his body at the time.
That's what the report came back. But you know what? Evidently, it really didn't affect him as bad as I thought it did, because when he went, he was on Interstate 65. You know where the 3 bridges are right there at Evergreen? In the middle bridge, he went under that bridge and he rolled. He went out on the bridge and dropped 80 feet and rolled 4 times and still got out of that car and put a tourniquet on his leg and tried to get out of there, and it was 20 degrees and he passed away from shock because of that. And I had someone tell me that he had tried to kill himself because of that methadone, and I don't believe that ever. I don't think that could have ever happened, but I was just curious about how much methadone stays in the body. I think it would have saved him in the long run.
Yeah. Now, I'll be glad to talk with you more about it one-on-one.
Is there any more from the community members or law enforcement?
You answer. I'm a grandparent of a person who has addiction. My question was about vaping, and you very much covered it. And thank you for doing this, everyone. Denise is my daughter, and I'm proud of it, and I wanted to say that she works very hard for all the community, and she doesn't have her finger just in this place. She has it in everybody's heart. So thank you for all you do, and thank you for coming tonight. This is the beginning, and it'll create itself many times, so thank you. Thanks, Leroy.
Yeah, Denise, there's something I wanted to add. This will kind of help. You had mentioned about getting people involved, ma'am, with those who have lost loved ones. That is a very important thing, because I think nobody other than someone who has lost a loved one to addiction can speak on behalf of what it is we are talking about right now than someone who has lost a loved one to that very thing. You know the ins and outs better than we do. Yes, we unfortunately see people who have overdosed, and we know we've lost people to them. And the sheriff's department deals with people that are dealing in drugs, and they see that aspect of it. And of course, the prosecutorial side of it, and then the mental health and substance abuse side of it. But we don't get to see the component of who your loved one was and what you lost them to, what they were like before and what they were like after. We may see a small piece of that in the field, but we don't see the full picture. So I would absolutely encourage us to be able to utilize people for that particular thing. I want to share something with you very quickly that I think you're not going to hear anywhere else. And I believe I said this before. I'm going to be pretty outspoken with some things. So we're good about telling you what we do. We're good about telling you what we're doing, what we're in process. But nobody's ever going to tell you, let me tell you what we're not doing. Let me tell you where we're missing the mark. And here's where I believe we're missing the mark in this community. And we've had these discussions a lot recently with our local physician staff. We're missing the mark in the follow-up. We're missing the mark in what is called case management. We can do a great job at responding to the call after it's already happened. We can do a great job at getting drugs off the street. But once we get that person in, they've been treated by a physician, they get, say, a prescription for Suboxone, who's doing the follow-up to make sure they're taking it appropriately, they're continuing it, they're going through the phases of that process? Nobody. It's crickets. You may find someone who's a loved one or a physician friend that's looking out for particular individuals, but as a system, we don't have anything in place that's doing that very well. That's where we're missing the mark. We're missing that one-on-one going out, hey, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, I know you just got released from the hospital. And by the way, I want to get my paramedics there 24 hours or less from their release from the hospital. That's a conversation I had with Dr. Stavros. That is the key. Not get a phone call a week later about addiction treatment, because by then, who knows what's happened a week later. That's where we're missing the mark, and that's what we're trying to do. So we have some processes in place. I'm going to talk to some of the people in this room later about some things, like I said, that we found out today. And we're going to get the ball moving. We're going to get things moving. We're going to gain some traction. We're finally going to do some stuff that needs to be done. Only thing I can say is sit back and watch what we do.
Thank you. And yes, go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank you for all being here and what you do to address this issue. I think we can all agree that this is a level of crisis in our community. And you're absolutely right. It's the follow-up that we're missing the mark on. In my world, we call it closing the loop. You know, you follow that patient all the way through and make sure that they went to where you referred them to, and that you're continuing to follow up so that they are successful. I'm healthcare, and I think when you look around the room, it's like, who isn't in the room? Faith-based, healthcare. And I hope that, and my prayer is, that this isn't just a one-and-done conversation, that this continues, and that the conversation continues to evolve, and so that when you have case management and you have follow-up, we might find other areas that we are missing the mark on. There might be things, is what do you don't know what you don't know. And so when you have those one-on-one opportunities to really peel back the onion on what's going on in that individual's life, it may unveil other opportunities in which we as a community can strengthen our alliances, leverage our resources, and maybe fill some gaps that we don't know exist today. So I thank you, and I look forward. I want to be a Community Health, Northwest Florida. We want to be at the table. We want to be a part of the solution. And as a country, you know, this is something that is seen throughout. There are other communities dealing with this. And perhaps there are some best practices that we can look to and maybe learn from and apply here. Thank you.
Thank you. And mentioning community health, they are here tonight for resource information. We have veterans representatives as well, because they are unique to this community. We have 211. We have Health and Hope Clinic. For those of you that don't know, you can get naloxone or Narcan from them, and it's free. And we also have, well, it used to be called West Florida, but I don't know the new name. But we are collectively here for that reason. Go ahead.
One thing, too, that I'd like to just point out is that from a public safety standpoint, and Chief Tercel can talk to to this a little bit as well, that this is a public safety, public health issue. I mean, this is an epidemic. This is something that quite a few of us, Community Health, United Way, Emergency Management, EMS, we're having a lot of different conversations about trying to look at what other communities have done to try to address this. And there are some communities that have done that, and we've had meetings with folks from Huntington, West Virginia, about they had a serious epidemic, and they have started to tackle this. Now, one thing that very much disappoints me is that there's not very many people in this room. Just as Ms. Molly was just mentioning, we have got to get this information out to the public. I'm so glad that P&J and WAR are here this evening. We've got to start taking these numbers. We've got to start educating the public. You know, this is a great first step. This is a conversation that we have got to continue because this situation is just going to get worse.
So thank you, everyone. We are about out of time. Do we have any closing remarks from our panelists? And on the back table again, if you have any further questions or any follow-up that you would like for us to try and follow up this, it is on the back table, and please feel free to fill that out, and we will try and follow up the best that we can. So any closing remarks?
Denise, I'll just say something. I alluded to it earlier, but we're here because we all understand that what we've been doing and what has been taking place is not enough. And we want to make sure that people understand what we understand individually, now we understand collectively. But Denise, I want to give you credit because, again, you picked up the phone and you called me because I'm the only poor sap you knew the number to. And I said, yes, I agree. And not only do I agree, I'll help you and I'll try to get my friend Ginger Madden up here and some others, and we talked a little bit about it. So again, we're not where we need to be. We're not where we're going to be, but I think it is a start. And I don't want to, I never want to leave a place before we celebrate at least the start, and so I think you should, before you leave here, give Denise a handshake and tell her thank you for starting this thing, because if it weren't for her, we wouldn't be here in this format either.
Well, thank you. I don't, it's about everyone in this room, because every family deals with substance use disorder, just not you, me, every single person, and we all are valued. So I'm appreciative of everybody up on the panel. We have some doctors here, but also to your regard, why aren't people here? Part of that is stigma. I did a presentation to parents on vaping, not in this county, and it was a very large high school. I had 3 parents show up. If we don't educate ourselves and take a step out of our own comfort zone, we can't help. So take it upon yourself and take a step out, because all of us are here in this together. And we can't law enforce ourselves out of it. We can't doctor ourselves out of it. Collectively, we have to work together. So we're going to do more. We're going to do more, and we're going to make it happen for our home, because this is our home, and we're going to make a difference. So thank you, everybody, for your time and effort tonight. If you have any further questions, please, I'll be around for a while. And thank you again, panelists, for your time and your energy. They volunteer. We have law enforcement here volunteering. All of you are here under your own time, so we appreciate it. And thank you tonight.